In the summer of 1898, the city of Dover, Delaware would be the site of a one-of-a-kind double murder that would shock not only Delawareans, but also the rest of the country. This crime was executed by means that was never done before in U.S. history. It's a case that really amplifies the term, "never take candy from a stranger." This is the heartbreaking story of the poison candy murders. Viewer discretion is advised. Mary Elizabeth Pennington, daughter of former Delaware Congressman John Pennington, would marry a charming fella by the name of John P. Dunning. He was a newspaper reporter back in 1891. The two settled in Dover, where they eventually had a daughter. Life was going pretty good for the loving couple. John's job, however, was pretty boring to say the least. Reporting the news in Dover, Delaware during the 1890s wasn't very exciting. So Dunning would later apply for a job that would take him, Elizabeth, and their baby daughter to the boisterous city of San Francisco, California. From the 1860s until the 1890s, San Francisco was transformed into the so-called Paris of the West. Here, the couple would have way more luxuries than what was available back in Delaware. This, to some, was the beginning of the end, as these many luxuries would lead to John overindulging and developing very bad habits. He became an avid gambler, which, even though John wouldn't see this at the time, was a very small snowball rolling down the side of a very steep mountain. He also very much enjoyed the warm company of women, many women. You see, John was a serial cheater and wouldn't think twice about indulging in extramarital activities behind his wife's back. His new position as a West Coast bureau chief for the AP in San Francisco did little to slow him down. In 1895, John was biking through Golden Gate Park when his ride gave out. As he bent over to repair it, he began chatting with a woman sitting on a nearby bench. Her name was Cordelia Botkin, and she struck John as extremely beautiful. She was 10 years older and charming. The two seemed to bond over the fact they both felt misunderstood by their spouses. Best of all, her estranged husband, Welcome Botkin, seemed indifferent to extramarital affairs. The two began an affair that would last for several years. However, his gambling habits would get out of hand and eventually catch up to him, as in 1896, Dunning lost his prestigious job with the Associated Press. He was fired for embezzling money to pay his gambling debts. As if things couldn't get worse, Mary would discover her husband's latest indiscretion. She was devastated, and with that, she packed her things and took their daughter back to Dover to live with her father. John and Cordelia continued their affair. They even moved in together to a residence at 927 Geary Street, where they lived with Cordelia's son and his mistress. Welcome Botkin maintained his own separate place in Stockton. Despite John's infidelity in her own, Cordelia seemed to believe things would be different between them, that John would somehow remain faithful. This was a delusional thought. "She is jolly company, but has raised Mary hell several times," John later said. "She wants me all to herself and gets jealous if I look at another woman." John would ignore these red flags, but being a walking red flag himself, he probably didn't see any of them. The two carried on until 1898, when John was asked to cover the Spanish-American War in Puerto Rico. It was an assignment he could hardly afford to turn down. The Associated Press had already fired him for embezzling funds to feed a gambling addiction. This was an opportunity to start fresh, not only professionally, but personally. At the train station before he went off, John declared his intentions to Cordelia. Assuming he were to survive covering the war, he would return to Dover to try and repair his marriage. Despite Mary's relocation, the two had continued writing to each other, and John held out hope he could reconcile with her. John was through with Cordelia. However, she had no intentions of letting him go. If she couldn't have Dunning, then no one would. Distraught over John's relocation, she wrote a taunting letter to Mary, whom she knew was in Dover, writing in the third person, Cordelia prodded her with details of her husband's infidelity, how he carried on with an interesting and pretty woman, and how Mary should hardly bother taking him back. She was desperate and tried her best to sabotage any remaining connections John had with Mary. These letters were very upsetting for her. She went to her father and asked him to intercept the letters and make sure she didn't see them. He kept the letters as they continued to arrive. What John had not seemed to realize was that Botkin was a very devious woman that would stop at nothing to get what she wanted by any means possible. Her moral compass was non-existent. In August of 1898, while sitting on the front porch of their Dover home, Mary Elizabeth received a package in the mail. It was addressed to her. Inside the package was a note that read, "With love to yourself and baby." The note was signed Mrs. C. Mary Elizabeth mistakenly thought it was from Mrs. Laura Corbailey, a friend she made while living in California. A total of 7 people ate the candies, including Mary, Mary's sister Ida, Mary's daughter, Mary's niece Leila Dean, Harry, and 2 family friends, Josephine Bateman and Ethel Millington. Only Josephine seemed to detect something was amiss. She found the candies to have some kind of crystal substance on them, which she kept spitting out of her mouth. That night, most of those who had attended the gathering became violently ill, with retching stomach pains and vomiting. John Pennington fetched a doctor to see what was wrong. Fortunately for him, he had no interest in the chocolates. The physician was perplexed and assumed it was food poisoning. When Pennington informed him about the candy, however, the doctor knew it was something far more serious. Testing later confirmed the chocolate contained arsenic. Arsenic, consumed in large amounts, can kill a person rapidly. Consumed in smaller amounts over a long period, it can cause serious illness or a prolonged death. Arsenic is a naturally occurring element that is widely distributed in the Earth's crust, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Preventions. It's typically found in the environment combined with other elements, such as oxygen, chlorine, sulfur, carbon, and hydrogen, often resulting in white or colorless powders that have no smell or special taste. As such, you can't usually tell if arsenic is present in food, water, or air. Unfortunately, within days, Mary and Ida were dead, likely from having consumed the most candies. Dunning was called back to the States, knowing little other than his estranged wife had been poisoned. When he saw the note from Mrs. C, his heart sank further. The handwriting was unmistakable. So was the fact that John had once told Cordelia that Mary loved candy. His affair had stretched from California to Delaware to strike a fatal blow to his family. Mary's father made the connection as well, noting that the letter included with the candy matched the writing of the letters Mary had previously received about a mystery woman carrying on with John in San Francisco. The newly widowed John directed authorities straight to Cordelia, who was staying with her husband back in Stockton. She put up little fight at being placed into custody. In San Francisco, Cordelia Botkin was charged with murder and 2 Delaware detectives. Several witnesses and some of their spouses set out for California. 50 years earlier, during the gold rush, Sussex County native Harbison Hickman took nearly 7 months to sail from Lewis to San Francisco. But with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, the same trip could be completed in a matter of days. At the trial, the contaminated candy, the note, and the handkerchief from the candy box were linked to Botkin, and the Lewis, Delaware pilot laconically observed, "The testimony in the trial was very damaging to her." In January 1899, Cordelia Botkin was found guilty by a jury, which needed just 4 hours, including 1 hour for dinner, to come to their conclusion. She was sentenced to life in San Quentin, but was remanded to a local jail while her appeal was heard. Cordelia Botkin was found guilty a second time in 1904 and was sentenced to life in prison. That turned out to not be a terribly long time. She died in 1910 at age 56 of what doctors called softening of the brain, an indelicate description of depression. John Dunning's career was ruined by the revelations that came to light during the trial. He died in Philadelphia in 1908, 2 years before Cordelia. The story remains a morbid source of curiosity in Dover, which in 2018 hosted a walking tour of the Pennington Mansion grounds, where Mary fell ill as well as her gravestone. Organizers sold boxes of candy with a promise none were poisoned. It was a macabre remembrance of both Mary Dunning and Cordelia Botkin, a woman who, by her own admission, would stop at nothing to have her desires fulfilled. And that'll conclude today's story. Thank you so much for sticking through to the end. If you enjoyed today's content, please like and subscribe and go check out this other video.